in Europe, and good evening here in Asia to investor, funds, and all participants online. Today, we would like to welcome you all to the SEACHANGE 2030 Knowledge Sharing Session. The executive who is joining us today, Mr. Adam Brennan, Chief Sustainability Officer of Thai Union Group, and Mr. Prat Kertpairo, Director of Sustainability Asia side of Thai Union Group. The session will be around 1 hour for the presentation and followed by 30 minutes for Q&A. Please note.
Thank you very much. And again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from my side. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about our newly launched SEACHANGE 2030 strategy, what it means for Thai Union, what it means for the industry, and then also what it means for you as our investment community. So I'm going to spend the next kind of hour or so taking you through the strategy, what some of the commitments are, and also what were some of the pressure points in terms of actually Thai Union embarking on this strategy. So as just mentioned, I'll be one of your speakers today, but also joined by Kun Prad, who's going to also take you through some of the details of the commitments. So what I'm going to take you through then is why have Thai Union launched its new sustainability strategy now? What is the new strategy? And then what are some of the commitments that sit under the strategy? Before I do that, I really want to take you through. We introduced our first SEACHANGE sustainability, and we've been helping to reshape the seafood industry for good since that date. To take you through some of the major milestones and achievements that we've had since 2016, I think we're very humble with the progress that we've had to date. Today, we are recognized as one of the leading seafood companies in sustainability. We're ranked number 1 on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We're also ranked number 1 on the Seafood Stewardship Index. And we've received a number of awards and recognitions over the years. But for me, the definition of sustainability is not a stagnant definition. Only because we are leaders today doesn't mean that we continue to operate as we do and still be leaders in 2030. And so that's really one of the key reasons why we set out about updating our strategy. Over the last few years, we've had a number of different milestones. We had the first introduction of our tuna commitment in 2016. In 2016, Thai Union set out an ambitious commitment at that time to have 75% of its tuna to be sourced more responsibly. As we moved on through the years, we introduced an audit mechanism to make sure that we are protecting and safeguarding the workers down our supply chain. Thai Union do not own or operate any fishing vessels ourselves. So it was very important for us to still take accountability and safeguard those workers in the supply chain. And we introduced a vessel code of conduct that really sets out Thai Union's expectations of our suppliers, the criteria that we expect to be on board, and then we have an auditing mechanism to go and audit against that. We've also introduced a human rights and diversity policy, and we have also ramped up our ability to disclose where all of our products are coming from. This is really critical. Transparency is a key cause of accountability. And throughout all of this journey, Thai Union have been extremely transparent around all of our progress, but also where some of the challenges have been as well over the last few years. And obviously that leads us to today, to SEACHANGE 2030, which I now want to take you through. So SEACHANGE 2030 is our sustainability plan to help reshape the seafood industry and provide solutions for both people and planet. There's a huge amount of global attention right now on environmental and issues related to the health of the planet, but we cannot forget the importance of people. They have been at the heart of our strategy since 2016, and they will continue to be at the heart of our strategy as we move forwards. When we announced the new strategy, we wanted to make sure that it was backed up with rigor and in terms of financial resources that have been dedicated to the delivery of this ambitious commitment. Thai Union is investing the equivalent of its entire net profit from 2022, which equates to about $200 million or 7.2 billion baht. This investment will be made between 2023 across the period towards 2030. When we look at some of the details of the strategy, there are two thematic pillars. We will be driving impact for our people and for our planet. For our people, we want to protect the safety, dignity, and well-being of our communities, our workers, and our consumers. And for our planet, we want to begin to see the environment recover from the climate crisis, but also play a much more active role in the protection and restoration of biodiversity as well. Sitting underneath these two thematic pillars are 5 future outcomes. These outcomes are designed, and all of the commitments are connected into one of these 5 future outcomes. The first is around human and labour rights. I mentioned this earlier. People have been at the heart of our SEACHANGE strategy from the very beginning. We will continue to reinforce all of the efforts that we've made across our group and supply chain to date, but we will continue to accelerate this work across other parts of the supply chain as well. From a health and wellness perspective, we believe that as a seafood company, we have a role to play in the promotion of blue foods. Blue foods can be healthy, they can be nutritious, and if they are responsibly sourced, they can also be sustainable. At a time where we have a growing global population and growing threats from food insecurity. On the planet side, we want to take a much stronger action and position on climate action, one of the biggest generational crises of our time. And Thai Union believe that although seafood is generally regarded as lower carbon intensive than other sources of protein, we still have a role to play in decarbonisation. The same can be said for biodiversity. Biodiversity has emerged more recently as its own generational crisis. But for Thai Union, we've been working on elements of biodiversity since 2016, when we introduced that first tuna commitment that set about changing the management of our fisheries towards more responsible and sustainable practices to ultimately safeguard the biodiversity in those fisheries and in our oceans. And then the last one is around circularity and making sure that Thai Union's own operational footprint is supporting the circular economy. Those are our 5 future outcomes, which we hope to achieve under SEACHANGE 2030. Sitting under these 5 outcomes are 11 detailed and interconnected commitments. The top 3 commitments that you can see here are our flagship commitments. The first is around our path to net zero emissions. The next is around expanding the work that we've done already on our tuna supply chain to other wild-caught species under our responsible wild-caught seafood commitment. And then the third flagship commitment is around responsible aquaculture, the first time that Thai Union Group have had a responsible aquaculture commitment. There are 8 others as well, all as important as each other. And what these 11 interconnected commitments do is they really pave the way for Thai Union to be acting holistically when it looks at social and environmental impacts and opportunities that we can have in our own operations and in our supply chain. What we're going to do now over the next 30 minutes or so is take a brief deep dive into these specific commitments. Before I do that, I just wanted to reflect on the SDGs. The SDGs are one of the most prominent ways of engaging and discussing sustainability. When Thai Union launched its original SEACHANGE strategy, it was focused on 4 of the SDGs: zero hunger, decent work, climate action, and life below water. We will again continue to work on the delivery of these SDGs, but you can now also see the expansion of our new strategy, and that we will, for the first time, be working in other areas like good health and well-being, gender equality, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption and production, as well as for the first time beginning to look at the impacts that we have through our land-based procurement. Sorry, the slides are a little slow. So next, I'm going to take you through the first commitment, which is our path to net zero emissions. This works against both our climate action and our biodiversity future outcome. Essentially, within our path to net zero emissions, there are essentially 4 commitments. There are 2 near-term commitments and there are 2 long-term commitments. Our near-term commitments are a -42% reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions between 2021 and 2030. That is our first commitment. Our second commitment then expands that to include scope 3. And scope 3 is important because those are the emissions that sit upstream and downstream of Thai Union and actually represent about 90% of our global greenhouse gas inventory. When we have set these targets, we have used the SBTI, the Science Based Target Initiative. And what that means is that we followed the 1.5 degree pathway, which is aligned with the Paris Agreement when we've gone about setting these commitments. And under that methodology, it requires absolute reductions. There is no ability for Thai Union to carbon offset and meet these new targets. The other 2 targets that we have are then long-term targets. The first is around a net zero target for scope 1 and 2, and the fourth is a net zero target for scope 3. Again, following SBTI methodology, what that translates into is a -90% reduction in scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions between 2021 and 2050. And that remaining 10% under their methodology, you are able to neutralize. So this is a huge commitment for Thai Union. And again, we are the first global seafood processor to set science-based targets. And we really feel that this is important because climate change is affecting the health of the oceans, which we are inherently reliant upon for access to raw material. So we believe it's our responsibility to play a role in the global decarbonisation as we move forwards. The next commitment then is around responsible wild-caught seafood. And this is really very much where we started in 2016. In 2016, as I mentioned earlier, we had a heavy focus on our tuna supply chain. And we've had that focus since. And today, we have gone beyond just looking at certification. We have our Tuna Commitment 2025 that sets about for 100% of our tuna to be either certified to MSC, which is the Marine Stewardship Council, or in a fishery improvement project, which is called a FIP. But in addition to that, we are also driving 5 other best practices across our tuna supply chain, including some flagship commitments like having 100% electronic monitoring or human observers on board our tuna vessels by 2025. So this new commitment really builds upon this, and it builds upon it by expanding the scope. So for the first time, we're going to be looking beyond tuna and including additional wild-caught species, specifically 6 species. These are salmon, sardine, mackerel, herring, blue swimming crab, and lobster. These 6 additional species, plus tuna, represents about 90% of Thai Union Group's total procurement every year. And within this commitment, we want to make sure that the wild-caught seafood comes from fisheries that are at sustainable levels or verifiably improving. We want to make sure that all of the vessels are safeguarding the workers on board. We will be driving best practices for seafarer welfare and working conditions. And we also want to be making sure that all of these vessels are implementing best practices to protect endangered, threatened, and protected species. Those are the three components of our new responsible wild-caught seafood commitment. And then as we move on to the last flagship goal, as I mentioned, this is Thai Union's first time that we are beginning to set group-level sustainability commitments for aquaculture. And there is a specific focus here on shrimp, given how important it is for Thai Union's portfolio. When we look at our aquaculture commitment, what we're really going to look at is 5 key things. And these 5 key things are how we are defining responsible procurement. The first is around environmental management. We want all of the farms that we source from to either be certified, for example, with the likes of ASC and BAP, or in an aquaculture improvement project, referred to as an APE. These will make sure that everything from disease management to welfare to climate change to biodiversity, all of these topics are encompassed or will be encompassed within this APE framework as we move these farms towards certification. The second component of this is around social and labour conditions inside the farms. We want to make sure that those workers are protected, that they are safely and legally employed. The third component is around antibiotics and making sure that we are not using any antibiotics across our supply chain, which are deemed critical for human health. The fourth component, and this is a really big component, is around responsible feed. Feed is important because it relies both on marine ingredients, but also land-based ingredients such as soy. Regardless of whether it's land-based or marine-based, all of these ingredients need to be responsibly sourced. When it comes to marine ingredients, that means it needs to come from a Marine Trust certified fishery, or it needs to come from a fishery improvement project. When we look at land-based, what we're really talking about here is soy. And soy is important because soy can be linked to deforestation, and deforestation can obviously have significant impacts towards both climate change and biodiversity. And then lastly, the fifth commitment is really underpinning the other 4, and that's around traceability. We want to make sure that we have full traceability right down to the farm level, but also have traceability beyond the farm as we begin to drive traceability also down the feed supply chain. So those are our 3 headline commitments: climate change, responsible wild-caught fisheries, and responsible aquaculture. I'm going to take a minute to pause, and I'll now hand over to Khun Prad, who's going to take you through some of the other commitments.
Thank you so much, Adam. So I'll take you through all the other commitment. Right. So the next commitment under the outcome, the outcome of the planet is ocean plastic reduction. So obviously, ocean plastics, it's a global issue, right? So there could be ocean plastic that's originate from fishing vessels, from ocean as well as land-based. So our commitment here is that by 2030, we will invest to divert 1,500 tons of ocean-bound plastic from our waterways and oceans through actions like working with vessels in our supply chain to raise awareness so they can reduce the risk of losing fishing gears. for example. Now, the next commitment is about sustainable packaging. So here we have two key commitments. Obviously, we as Thai Union, as a food company, we have our own brands. For example, Select, Q Fresh, John West, Chicken of the Sea. So here, our commitment is that by 2025, 100% of our branded products will have sustainable packaging. At the same time, we produce for our customers, global retailers and buyers around the world. So we want to work with them to advocate for sustainable package. So here we have a commitment that by 2030, we will advocate for at least 60% of private label products to be sustainably packaged. Now, coming back to our own operations, here what we call best-in-class manufacturing. So we want to promote circular economy. Here we have a commitment that at our 5 key processing facilities, 4 of those are in Thailand, 1 in Seychelles, we want to create a closed loop factories by implemented 3 programs. 1, zero water discharge, zero waste to landfill, and then zero food loss. Now, agriculture, responsible sourcing of agriculture. We want to make sure that we have responsible procurement of key agricultural products, ensure that it protect national resources throughout value chain. And here we focus on 3 commodities, namely soy, palm oil, and chicken. So for soy and palm oil, which can be linked to deforestation, we want to ensure that our sourcing achieves zero deforestation 100% by 2030. As well as for chicken, we have goal of responsible sourcing of chicken in our supply chain 1% by 2030 as well. Now, on ecosystem restoration commitment, so clearly critical ecosystem, especially for the blue economy, like mangroves, coral reefs are important to ocean resources. So here we will invest 250 million baht for projects on protection and restoration of critical ecosystem where we or our supply chain operates. Now, Adam and I talk about key commitments for the planet. Let me switch to now commitments, last 3 commitments for people. So the first of those is our commitment to provide safe, decent, and equitable work throughout our operation and supply chain. And this very much built on our previous commitment since we launched SEACHANGE in 2016. So one of the commitments is that 100% of the vessels, the fishing vessels, and the farms that we source from must meet current industry best practices in welfare and working conditions. Now, on gender equality, we have a separate commitment that 50% of management positions are held by women for our own operations. The second commitment for people is around nutrition and health. So seafood is generally healthy, but there are ways we can ensure that our products meet nutritional best practice guideline and also drive positive nutrition for wellness. So here we have 2 separate linked commitments. One is that 100% of our branded ambient products must meet our nutritional guidelines, which we align with WHO guidelines. Another commitment is that 100% of our new branded ambient products will drive positive nutrition. Now, the last commitment that focuses on the outcome of people is around corporate citizenship. Here, it's about protecting and helping peoples and communities around where we operate our sources. So we will invest 250 million Thai baht to support and give back to communities. What is through programs that are focusing on health and well-being, education, and disaster relief. So now I'm gonna switch back to Adam to explain.
Thank you, comrade. I would like to just take the opportunity to remind all of you to please pop some questions if you have any in the Q&A box. Those will be then reviewed by the team, and then we look forward to answering those in a few slides' time. So then I really want to look at what the opportunity is with SEACHANGE 2030. I think what's important to recognise is that, again, I started this at the very beginning. Sustainability is not new for us. We introduced our first strategy in 2016. And actually, between 2016 to 2020, we've actually invested $100 million into our SEACHANGE program. A lot of that money has been going towards improving those fisheries and improving those vessels within the tuna supply chain, as well as looking at other areas like our own operations as well. But obviously, this is a sizable expansion. You know, as I mentioned in the introduction, we'll now be investing around $200 million between now through the period to 2030. But what I want to explore is what are some of the key reasons and opportunities of, embarking on this sustainability journey. I mentioned this leadership position within the industry. And I also mentioned around how we need to continue to challenge ourselves by what it means to be a leader. And how do we challenge those boundaries? How do we raise the bar and continuously strive for improvement? And so really one of the areas that we're trying to achieve is to make sure that Thai Union really retains that industry leadership position. But also, if we go back to some of the early commitments that we made in 2016, for example, around tuna, they were very ambitious at the time. They were some of the first that the industry had ever seen. But as we move towards 2020, more and more of those commitments actually become licensed to operate, right? And that is exactly by intention. We want to raise the bar, we want to show the industry what is possible, and then encourage others to follow suit. So there was a significant premium to more responsibly sourced tuna back in 2016. But over those next few years, that premium had more or less dissipated. There is still a slight premium there, but it is very, very small. So throughout those years, what we saw is that the number of fisheries that were entering in fishery improvement projects really helped to dissipate some of that premium that was originally associated with it. And we want to make sure that we continue to focus on those types of initiatives and activities as we move forwards. We also consider it that it is a must for long-term business. I mentioned the threat to the health of the ocean planet, the planet's oceans, be it through climate change, be it through biodiversity collapse. When a fishery collapses, it can take decades to recover. That's why responsible fishery management is so important, right? We need to make sure that we are protecting the health of our oceans so that we can continue to have a secure raw material supply as we move forwards and ultimately ensure long-term business continuity. A next area that we've been heavily focused on throughout the SEACHANGE development is really also looking at what our customers are doing. We supply into some of the world's biggest retailers around the world, and they have their own levels of aspirations. So we've gone through their strategies. We've tried to understand what do they need from a seafood processor like Thai Union, and how can we help them to deliver on their own goals and commitments so that we can position Thai Union as not only a trusted seafood supplier, but also one that can help them to execute their own vision and roadmaps. And then lastly, there is an opportunity here to also improve our operating efficiency. We are beginning to explore what are some of the interventions, the technologies, the innovations that can be applied throughout the supply chain. And actually, a lot of these can have sometimes quite a short payback time. There is an opportunity here to improve the operating efficiency for both Thai Union's own operations, but also that of our supply chain as well. And then lastly, but not mentioned here, is we're also going to be working with the regulatory authorities to also make sure that we are again trying to level up the industry. and that we help to move everyone towards scalable impact that has permanence. So with our new strategy, this is extremely ambitious. We know this, but we are also very, very aware that we need to activate now a broad ecosystem of stakeholders when it comes to the successful delivery of SEACHANGE. This is going to involve our consumers. It's going to involve engaging with our investment community, with our suppliers, with our own employees, with our customers, and with our NGOs. It's only going to be through this full activation of our stakeholders, that we are really able to strive against some of the progress that we're expected to achieve over the next few years. One of the things that Thai Union has done very successfully since 2016 is actually partner up with some of the biggest NGOs that operate within the seafood space. I think we acknowledge that we don't always have all of the expertise. We don't always have all of the resources. They're not always located in the right places. And so the NGOs, if we work in partnership with them, can help deliver real pragmatic impact. And, be it through the likes of the Nature Conservancy, who are our partners on our electronic monitoring commitment, or some of the new commitments that we've made around endangered, threatened and protected species, where we've partnered with the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership. We will continue to look for new partners and really help to work together towards the delivery of some of these goals. But I also wanted to take a moment about the importance of engaging with the investment community. I also believe that you have a key role to play. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to regulatory authorities, we engage regularly with policymakers because we want to show them what the private sector is able to achieve. But also, they can help to make sure that the entire seafood industry is moving in the same direction, right? And that we're raising that bar for the full industry. And I believe that the investment community can also play a similar role. You can challenge some of the organizations that you're investing in and making sure that they are really acting responsibly, either through some of the uses of the indexes that are out there or also through one-on-one discussions. And so really, it's only collectively that we're going to be able to move the needle and help drive change across the full industry. So with that, I come to my last slide, which I think is really a call to action, right? The time for action is now. I believe that we can be united as change makers, but we must act with urgency, right? There are numerous critical threats that are facing our planet, that are facing our ocean. And this is a real watershed moment for us now to begin to act and move our mindset. Instead of abundance, we are moving to abundance from scarcity, so that ultimately we can help to protect the world's oceans and our planet. So before we move into the Q&A session, there is a short QR code, and my colleague will help to explain to you how to use that.
Okay, that's for the presentation. Before going through the Q&A session, could everyone please take a few minutes to complete the survey by scanning QR code that show on the screen? Okay, now you can scanning the QR code that show on the screen.
There are really two areas that we would like to understand from our investors. The first is around how you are defining a company's ESG performance. This is important for us because every year we are faced with the challenge of which of these indices do we want to report into. Some of them we report into very actively, others we report into very passively. So this will help us to prioritize for next year which of these indexes are most important to you. And then the second question is really around disclosure. I mentioned that Thai Union have always had transparency at heart. We have our global sustainability report, which is aligned with the GRI. We've also most recently released our task force on climate disclosure and numerous other types of disclosures, but we also want to understand what type of disclosure are you expecting from Thai Union as well as we move into next year.
Okay, now I would like to open the floor for Q&A. If anyone has the question, please send into the Q&A chat box. Okay, now we have the question. The first question, if at the $200 million budget, can you explain more on the what percentage would you allocate that to the key project, and what is the timeline of spending during 2023 to 2030?
Sure. So let me take that. I think, obviously $200 million, as I said, is going to be divided across the 7 to 8 year period. I do expect that for a lot of these commitments, they are big, they are bold, they are ambitious, and it's not going to be easy to move the needle against some of these commitments, certainly in the early phase of implementation. It's almost going to be like a hockey stick. Whereas we begin to look at our carbon emissions, it's going to take quite some time for us to work with our supply chain and to begin to drive implementation. But I think to answer the question directly, it's really going to be in the areas of climate change and aquaculture, where I expect most of the investments to be made. Right? I think the scale of change that is needed within climate change is going to have to be properly resourced. And I also mentioned that our aquaculture commitment is also the first time the group is really taking a serious look into our shrimp supply chain. And so there's also going to be a huge amount of resources that need to be activated there. So I think specifically those two commitments will probably receive some of the heaviest funding. In the early stages, we're going to be focusing on capacity building, awareness raising. We're going to be seeking out new technologies and innovations, and then obviously over the next few years, actually begin to drive innovations.
Okay, the next question, can you elaborate more on the project action we expect to see in the 2023 to 2025 in the as 1/3 of your 2030 journey?
Sure. So I think, in the early stages, as I just started to mention, it's, I think, firstly going to be focused on traceability, specifically within the aquaculture supply chain, right? This is where we started in 2016 with our tuna commitment. If you don't know where those tuna boats are, if you don't know who owns them, then obviously you're very limited in actually being able to drive impact on the ground. So certainly within aquaculture, we're really going to be starting with traceability and making sure that we're able to trace all of those products down to farm. And that, again, we can begin to also understand some of the feed ingredients. We're also going to be working heavily on data. We need better data. We need higher quality data, and we need higher confidence in some of the data, specifically as it relates to climate change. So we're also going to be working with our supply chain to have an increased access to data so that we can better monitor our progress. And then, as I mentioned earlier, awareness, education raising, in addition to seeking technologies, innovations, and partnerships that can help us deliver on some of these commitments.
Okay, and the next question, as we didn't own any vessels, what's the mechanism to evaluate, or how do we monitor our suppliers?
So Thai Union is obviously a global seafood processor. And what that means is we don't own any fishing vessels. We own very few shrimp farms. And so we really need to make sure that we have long-standing, trusted long-term relationships with our suppliers. This is how we were, able to be so successful with some of our tuna commitments. So really, it's around creating those relationships. But then, as I mentioned earlier on, we also then began to cascade policies and commitments down our supply chain. We are only able to do that, again, through having the right levels of traceability. But when we cascade policies down the supply chain, that's actually the easy part. How you actually monitor and how you actually improve are the two critical components. So there, for example, I mentioned earlier that we actually have our own auditing framework. We put boots on board the vessels. We are able to assess the conditions on board those vessels. We are able to interview crew. We are able to interview the captain and the supplier to understand what is the reality on the ground. If the conditions don't meet our expectations, then we put in place a vessel improvement plan, and we make sure that there is continuous improvement within our supply chain as they strive to meet our commitments.
The next question, is it possible to quantify ROI from the $200 million US dollar investment, whether in the form of the lower financing costs, larger business opportunities, or any avoidance of regulatory compliance costs and etc.?
Yeah, really, really good question. I spoke there at the end about some of the business opportunities that we see. We have assessed all of our biggest private label customers and their own sustainability ambitions. I, personally and honestly believe that there is a significant business opportunity here for Thai Union to grasp as, there is increased focus on this, and as some of these big retailers are looking for trusted and credible partners in the supply chain. And that is what obviously Thai Union is able to offer to some of our customers. I think in terms of the risk, this is also a great question. If you look at our latest TCFD report, you will see there some of the climate risks that we have been able to estimate through carbon pricing. Now, obviously, there's still a large amount of uncertainty what happens with potential carbon taxes, but we've analysed our financial exposure, and if I can remember the numbers correctly, I believe it could cost us up to $76 million per year. Right, that is our total enterprise exposure. Right, that includes scope 1, 2, and 3. So upstream and downstream emissions as well. Now, those wouldn't all necessarily be passed on to Thai Union. A lot of those would be absorbed by our suppliers, by our customers. But that, if we look at the total enterprise risk exposure related to carbon pricing, it's a significant amount of money. And so obviously we took that into consideration when we started to define what our climate change targets should look like.
And the next question, what is the progress to achieving the net zero by 2050?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've only just launched these commitments a month or so ago. So as I said earlier, the progress will be more like a hockey stick. I think specifically with climate change, I mentioned the need to get access to higher quality data. An increased amount of primary data from our supply chain. That's difficult. There are not the instruments right now in the supply chain to do that. And the food industry is also extremely fragmented. It involves working with tens of thousands of farms. It involves working with thousands of vessels so that we can begin to track individual performance. So that's really going to be our focus in the early years. But at the same time, we're not going to let the data burden stop us from driving impact on the ground. Later this year, we will be announcing some new projects that are really focused on carbon and what types of interventions work, where they work, and how they are able to reduce carbon emissions.
Okay, and the next question, when you compare to your commitments with peer or competitors, do you think TU is ahead of industry or on par? How would you see it?
So I think when we announced our first strategy in 2016, this was fairly revolutionary for the seafood industry at that time. And as I said, over the next few years, certainly, as we move towards 2020, going into 21 and 22, we did see the rest of the seafood industry catching up. And that's a great thing. We absolutely encourage that. That's how we, really create that permanent impact across the entire seafood industry. And so we recognize that, and we also recognize the opportunity now to go further. And so that's what we believe our SEACHANGE 2030 strategy does. We believe this is one of the most ambitious, strategies out there in the seafood sector. You can see how holistic it is, tackling all of the material, social, and environmental impacts that we have across our global supply chain.
Okay, the next question, how we allocate $200 million across the 11 commitments?
I believe I answered that one earlier.
In the next question, do you elaborate more detail on what's the impact or cost of the weather pattern changing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now we have some of the highest prices of fish that the industry has seen. And that's very much partly been related to the effects of El Nino affecting the catch. And so, we do expect climate change to affect, weather patterns. We do expect more extreme weather events as we move forwards. And so, it's important that we have, a resilient supply chain. We're going to be working with our fisheries to understand, what are the risks at a fishery level against the different scenarios of climate change so that we can begin to put in place mitigation and adaptation plans. Okay, it's one thing to try and mitigate climate change, but some degree of ocean warming is inevitable. And with that will start to, affect the location and availability of some of the tuna stocks. So it's also important that we don't just mitigate climate change, but we also adapt to climate change. And so again, we'll be working with our fisheries to make sure that they are fully aware of some of the climate change risks as we move forwards.
Okay, and the next question, how do you apply these commitments to your subsidiary, such as TFM and ITEL?
Okay, so for those of you that don't know, TFM is Thai Union Feed Mill, and ITC is ITAL. Thai Union Feed Mill is predominantly producing aqua feed, whereas ITAL is our pet care company, both independently listed on the Thai Stock Exchange. But this SEACHANGE strategy is for Thai Union Group. You saw earlier on around a commitment with responsible chicken. That commitment is so important because chicken is actually a growing protein that we are sourcing. And a lot of that is coming from the pet care under ITAL. So all three publicly listed companies, Thai Union Group, ITAL, and Thai Union Feed Mill, are all covered under this sustainability strategy, as are all of our subsidiaries.
And the last question, referring to our investment, does it mean you had higher costs, which may lead to pricier catfish under the cost-plus model?
So I think, it's important to recognize that obviously sustainability costs money, right? But I want to go back to the example that I mentioned earlier, right? Around many of the sustainability commitments that we announced in 2016 becoming licensed to operate over the few years since the introduction of that strategy. So tuna remains an affordable, healthy, nutritious protein. That is not going to change as we implement SEACHANGE 2030. We're going to be making sure that we activate enough financial resources to drive change, whilst also continuing to be competitive and obviously offering the consumers a product that meets their needs.
Any questions from online? Okay, that's all for today. I would like to thank you, our management, Mr. Adam and Mr. Brad, for sharing us the detail of SEACHANGE 2030. And thank you for the participants who are joining us. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact our team. We will try to find out some answers for you. Thank you again and goodbye.
Thank you very much.